Hi, I'm Troy Cross. I'm a senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, professor at Reed College, and this is Brent Buchanan, CEO of Signal. And we're going to present two separate studies on Bitcoin adoption and usage in the United States. In addition to being a Bitcoin Policy Institute fellow, I'm also the co-founder of the Nakamoto Project, which is sort of a BPI spinoff. Last year, we did a survey of 3,538 Americans, the largest comprehensive survey of Bitcoin on Bitcoin usage and adoption to date. And this year we ran another survey, the same size. Last year, what we found, let me see. Here's our sample. Very proud of our sample, which we gathered in March, a large representative sample of the U.S. population. Last year, what we found was that Bitcoin ownership is widespread and, apart from skewing male and younger, matched the US population in many, many respects. This year, we found, through a new measure of Bitcoin ownership, that 18.6% of Americans, or 48 million adults 18 plus, own Bitcoin in some way or other, either on an exchange or in self-custody or through an ETF or mutual fund or through a joint account with a family member. We were surprised how large this number was, but especially 4.21% of Americans, or 11 million Americans, claim to hold their own keys and hold Bitcoin in self-custody. That's a behavior that's been characterized by some regulators as suspect or shadowy, but it's actually a large percentage of Americans. Oops, that's not right. There we go. We looked at the political orientation of Bitcoin owners, and this is owners versus non-owners. You can see this year they're skewing slightly to the right, but still the most common political ideology of Bitcoin owners is neutrality. Here's a comparison between this year's political distribution and last year's. You can see slight increases on the right and slight decreases on the left. Maybe this is due to a contentious election and the role of Bitcoin in political discourse. But I look at this and see center-right, which is still very different from what you would expect if you just read stories about Bitcoin in the media, or certainly listen to discourse on Capitol Hill, or, God forbid, check social media. This is what happened in Bitcoin sentiment. We measured Bitcoin sentiment through 4 separate measures with 4 questions each. Do you know about Bitcoin? How much do you know about Bitcoin? Do you trust Bitcoin? Do you think Bitcoin is useful? And do you think that Bitcoin is good, or Bitcoin users are good? We found this, and when we combine all of these 16 questions, we get a measure of Bitcoin sentiment. We saw sentiment slightly drop overall last year, despite Bitcoin's price more than doubling, despite regulatory tailwinds, despite treasury adoption, despite so much winning that we're sick of winning in Bitcoin. And where we lost sentiment was on the political left and among women and among non-owners. Owners are more jazzed about Bitcoin than they have ever been. So we're starting to see some polarization on sentiment. One thing we did last year and repeated again this year was do a moral foundation profiles of Bitcoin users. Moral foundations theory it tries to explain behavior through our deepest moral values, and has found that liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, differ in their moral foundations, with Republicans prizing values like purity, loyalty, and respect for authority more than liberals will prize equality, proportionality, and care. We found Bitcoiners had their own distinct moral profile. We call it, internally, we call it moral maximalism. They seem to care about everything more than everyone. We interestingly found the same result this year as last year, very robust, but not nearly as robust a predictor. None of these factors, age, gender, race, we found non-whites twice as likely to own Bitcoin as whites this year. matter as much as whether you trust Bitcoin, know about it, think it's useful, or think it's good. These factors predict whether you own Bitcoin to an extremely high degree. So Bitcoin really still remains an asset that you're most likely to own if you know about it. It's not a matter of who you are, but what you know and what you believe. I'm not going to get into this, but it shows how much more those indicators matter to Bitcoin adoption than politics. And finally, oh no, my QR code, which I had earlier at the beginning. There we go. Somehow it got early in the stack. Here's where you can see the study. Thank you.
So what we'll talk about for the next 5 minutes here, once they pull up the deck, and there's also a QR code on that if you want to download the full deck. We conducted a study last week among midterm voters. Our firm does Republican politics and center-right issues in the US and around the world. And so we tend to focus more on voting audiences than people or general population at large. And so this survey, the numbers that you're seeing come from the just midterm voters. And there's a lot of similarities with what was just shared in the data. So if you look at what are those who own or hold Bitcoin, how do they differ? How do they look similar to other midterm voters as a whole? You can see that they are more economically oriented. They see inflation and cost of living and jobs in the economy as more of a top issue than midterm voters as a whole. They also plan to vote more on election day than they do through other modes of voting. This is actually more a demographic factor of who is an owner of Bitcoin compared to any other attitudinal aspects to them. And so what we found is, and so you'll see on the rest of this chart, is that anything in orange is Bitcoin owners, anything in blue is all midterm voters. And with this, you'll notice that we've got over 31% of midterm voters that own Bitcoin. And there's even a higher percentage that own other types of cryptocurrency. So it's reaching almost 40% of midterm American voters that own some sort of cryptocurrency, with 31% of those owning Bitcoin. You'll notice here that the sentiment among these folks who own Bitcoin is more positive about the direction of the country than voters as a whole. And this plays out on what we call the generic ballot. So this is asking a simple question of, do you prefer the Republican or the Democratic candidate for Congress? This isn't asking about your specific district. It's just a general question that we ask to figure out what are the broad political winds doing right now in the U.S. And you can see that Democrats hold a small 1-point advantage right now for the midterm. For context, this was around 7 points at this point in Trump's first term. So Republicans as a whole are doing significantly better going into this midterm than they were the 2018 midterm. And a lot of that is buoyed by these Bitcoin owners. So looking overall at the images of the candidates, you can see here that I think we got the full deck pulled up here. So I'm going to flip through a bunch of slides, but you're welcome to download and look through the entire full deck. That Donald Trump really is an enigma, period, but an enigma above and beyond with Bitcoin owners. So when we look at the generic ballot of Bitcoin owners leaning towards Republicans, Trump's image and how he performed in the 2024 election is actually 5 to 6 points better than Republicans as a whole. And that kind of shows you this disparity between Donald Trump as an individual and the rest of Republicans, and the gap that they have to span between the two. Next, looking at just cryptocurrency as a whole, and I think this is really interesting compared to the next slide of Bitcoin. I want you to just pay attention to how much these bars don't change at all when we ask about Bitcoin specifically. Almost no different. Troy mentioned earlier, Bitcoin's basically the Kleenex of cryptocurrency. Nobody says, "Would you hand me a tissue?" anymore. And this is how voters and owners of Bitcoin also feel. Because you can see almost no change between the two in how voters and Bitcoin voters feel about the two. And then another question that we asked was about financial system values, and this was to all voters. And you'll see that outside of flexibility and innovation and slightly on simplicity, basically Bitcoin owners value the same things in a financial system as those who do not own Bitcoin. And then another one that we asked was, do you prefer a traditional financial system, a traditional and emerging, kind of in the middle, get both, or just emerging? And this is where you see a significant surge among those who own Bitcoin that want to see the middle ground, not just completely a new decentralized financial system, but a decentralized system along with the traditional system. We also asked similar questions about usefulness. I found this really fascinating because if you look at overall midterm voters, they find Bitcoin much more useful than they have a positive image of Bitcoin, which is interesting. I think it's something to really lean into in messaging Bitcoin to folks who do not currently own it, is to explain the usefulness of it. Because one of the things that we ask those who don't own it is, why do you not own it? And it essentially comes down to they don't understand it. And they don't trust it because they don't understand it. And they think it's too risky because they don't understand it. And so one of the core premises in communicating Bitcoin beyond where it is today is to really tie it back to the useful purposes of it, as opposed to it's this thing that lives in the internet on ones and zeros. And that's about the extent of what most people understand about it. And for those who are investing in it, you can see that the plurality by far is 62% are saying that it is because of that it is an investment for them. So I'll flip through these real quickly since this is the full deck instead of the short one. And you'll see that only 60% of Bitcoin owners see a strategic Bitcoin reserve as that they support it, which I found interesting. I expected this to be more in the 80s. That they would see this as some benefit to them. And this kind of goes back to, why do people not own Bitcoin? They don't understand it. And I think there's a number of owners of Bitcoin who vote who don't understand what a strategic reserve actually means, which is why you see this, what I would consider middling support at 60% compared to how supportive Bitcoin owners are of Bitcoin itself. Same when you get to stablecoin conversion, you see a 2-point drop-off among those who own Bitcoin because I think they understand it less. Voters have absolutely no clue. That's how you read that bar there. When you get a third, a quarter distribution of sorts, that means voters have no clue what you're asking them when you see that in data. And then you get even further when we get to actually calling something an act. And we explained it to them, what this Bitcoin Act does, and we dropped to 54% support among Bitcoin owners. So the rest of this is, I think this is the last thing that we'll close on here, and you can get the rest of the deck, is that even non-Bitcoin owners, a plurality, are more likely to vote for a legislator because they support Bitcoin. And what Troy and I were talking about earlier is this really comes down to what does Bitcoin represent in its personal freedom, and its personal ownership, its individualism. It's a lot of values that a large majority of Americans believe, and that is the communication mechanism. Explain the usefulness and tie it to the values, and that's how Bitcoin grows beyond its current ownership base. So thank you for the opportunity.
Just one final remark here. They found basically no downside for a politician supporting Bitcoin, only upside among across the board. It's really remarkable. I hope you check out both studies. Thank you.